A to Z Mysteries, Book Number 20, The Talking T.Rex, by Ron Roy. Chapter 3. Thunder woke Dink during the night. He lay snugly in bed, watching the storm through his window. As lightning flashed, he thought about Tyrone standing out there in the dark and rain. The next day, Dink got to the high school around 11:30. He gazed up at Tyrone. The dinosaur was tall and silent under a blue sky. His mouth was closed, and his eyes stared into the distance. The grass was still wet from the storm, and mist rose as it dried in the sun. Judd, Dean, and Scoop were nowhere in sight. Dink walked over to the truck and looked in the window. Dean's sleeping bag was spread across the seats. A few minutes later, Ruth Rose showed up with her little brother, Nate. She was dressed in orange from her headband down to her socks and sneakers. When Nate saw Tyrone, his mouth fell open. He walked up to one of the rear legs and touched it. "It feels like a rubber dinosaur toy," he said. Josh and his brothers, Brian and Bradley, came loping across the playing field. Pal was tugging on his leash. The twins stopped in their tracks. "It's a Tankosaurus!" Brian yelled. "No, it's not," Bradley argued. "It's a Chainosaurus." Josh laughed. "Guys, it's a Tyrannosaurus." "It's not real, is it, Josh?" asked Bradley. Josh let Pal off his leash. "No," he said. "It's just a big action figure." Scoop pulled up in his red car and parked next to Tyrone. He hopped out and walked over to the kids. "Morning," he said. "Some storm last night, huh? The thunder nearly knocked us out of our beds." Scoop sat on the ground and pulled on a pair of sandals. His wet sneakers were tied together, hanging from the car's antenna. Dean and Judd came walking through Center Park. "Hi, kids," Judd said. "Scoop, you missed a great breakfast. That Ellie makes amazing waffles." Scoop nodded. "I couldn't seem to wake up," he said. Judd looked at Nate, Brian, and Bradley. "Do you guys like dinosaurs?" The three little kids beamed and nodded. "T.Rex is my favorite," Nate said. People from town began arriving and stood around, gaping up at Tyrone. Dink waved to Mr. Paskey from the book nook. He saw Mr. and Mrs. Spivets, who owned the Shangri-La Hotel. Dink saw his mom show up with Josh's and Ruth Rose's mothers. Josh's mom carried a picnic basket. "Guys, go sit with Mom, okay?" Josh asked the twins. "Can we take Pal?" Brian asked. Josh handed the leash over to Brian. "Okay, but don't let him off. And take him home when Mom leaves, okay?" "Why does Brian get to do everything?" Bradley whined. Josh sighed. "You two can share the leash, okay?" Nate, Brian, and Bradley led Pal toward their mothers. "This is great," Judd said, watching the crowd increase. "Dean, why don't you get Tyrone ready while Scoop and I collect money?" While the kids were picking a place to sit, Dink saw more people he knew from town. A bunch of the O'Leary kids showed up, and Dink waved at them. Some people brought chairs or blankets to sit on. The high school playing field was filling up. Judd and Scoop passed through the crowd, collecting $1 from each person. When their hands were filled with bills, the men walked over to the truck and locked the money inside the cab. They each did this 2 or 3 times. "They must make a ton of money," Josh said. "I'll bet there are 200 people here." Judd climbed up onto the truck bed with a cordless microphone. "Thanks for coming, folks," he said to the crowd. When everyone was quiet, Judd went on to explain why they were raising money. "Our museum should be built by next summer, and I hope some of you will come for a visit," he said. Judd pointed his mic at the dinosaur. "Now I'd like you all to meet my friend, Tyrone. Tyrone, why don't you tell these good folks about yourself? He said. Nothing happened. Tyrone stood silent and still. He didn't say a word. I guess Tyrone is shy this morning, Judd said. Then in a louder voice, he said, Tyrone, can you say hi to all our friends out here? Wiggle your tail if you hear me. This got a few laughs, but Tyrone still didn't move. Some of the kids in the audience began to fidget. A boy sitting behind Dink muttered, I wonder if we can get our money back. Then suddenly Tyrone's tail moved to the right, then to the left. His small front arms waved up and down. His mouth opened, and Tyrone said, Hi, in a deep voice. Hi, Tyrone, the crowd yelled back. How many of you know what kind of dinosaur I am? Tyrone asked. Dink recognized Dean's voice coming from Tyrone's mouth. Every kid and adult raised a hand. Tyrannosaurus, Nate hollered. That's right, I'm a Tyrannosaurus Rex, Tyrone said. Now, how many of you remembered to eat a good breakfast this morning? Most people raised a hand. Well, Tyrone said, nodding his massive head, about 70 million years ago, I ate other dinosaurs for my breakfast. Everyone laughed. Judd hopped off the truck and sat with Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose. Dean's good with the crowd, isn't he? Judd said. You'd swear Tyrone is really talking, Dink said. Judd nodded. Yeah, Dean's a genius with anything mechanical. He had me scared at the beginning, though. I thought something went wrong with the computer. Tyrone told the audience all about the dinosaurs who once roamed North America. He talked about what they ate, how they protected themselves, and how they raised their young. The show lasted about half an hour. I hope you'll all go to the library and learn more about dinosaurs, Tyrone said, waving goodbye with his small arms. And come visit me next summer in Montana. A lot of the kids yelled, Bye, Tyrone, as the people began to leave. That was so cool, Josh told Judd. How many schools have you gone to so far? Judd scratched his head. Gosh, I don't really know, maybe 50 or so. Scoop keeps track of all of that. I think he's lined up about 20 more before we head back to Montana. Dean climbed out of Tyrone and walked over to where the kids and Judd were sitting. That was great, Judd told Dean. But what happened at the beginning? Dean shrugged. I couldn't get the laptop to boot up, he said. One of the cables was loose. Well, at least you fixed it, Judd said, standing up. It's getting warm, he added. I could use some ice cream. After we clean up, why don't we meet at Ellie's? Tyrone is treating. You just made Josh happy, Ruth Rose said. What can we do? Judd pulled a plastic bag from his pocket. If you'll go around and pick up paper, that would be a great help, he said. While Judd walked toward the truck, Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose spread out and began collecting litter. Dink was leaning over to grab a crumpled flyer when he heard a shout. He looked up. The yell had come from near Tyrone. Judd, Dean, and Scoop were huddled in front of the open door. Even from 100 feet away, Dink could hear Judd yell, I don't believe it. Chapter 4. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose ran toward Tyrone. What happened? Dink asked. Our money got stolen, that's what happened, Scoop said. The money you just collected? Josh asked. Judd shook his head. No, I still have that. He held up 2 thick stacks of bills with rubber bands around them. I was going to add it to the rest of the money, but it's gone. Dean pointed to the floor inside Tyrone's belly. The table, chair, and carpet had been moved. Where the table and chair had stood was a square hole cut into the flooring. A hinged door was open, revealing a compartment. It was empty. I built that as a hiding place, Dean said. That's where we kept the money, in a duffel bag. We've been putting it there since we left Montana. How much money was there? Josh asked. Judd's face was white. All the money we've made so far, he said in a shaky voice. Almost $5,000. 6 pairs of eyes stared into the empty compartment. I don't see when anyone could have gotten in there, Scoop said. Judd closed his eyes for a second. I put the duffel bag in there yesterday, he said, after we got Tyrone all set up. So someone stole it between yesterday afternoon and this morning, Dean said. And it couldn't have happened last night, because I slept out here. I'm going to get Officer Fallon, Ruth Rose said. He's the chief of police. What can he do now? Judd asked. The money is long gone. Officer Fallon catches a lot of crooks, Dink said. Josh glanced down at the ground, dry now from the sun. He might find some clues around here. They're right about bringing the police in, Judd, Dean said. We have to do everything we can to find our money. I'll be right back, Ruth Rose said as she took off running. Well, no one's getting this money, Judd said. He opened his shirt and stuffed the bills inside. Dink felt Josh pinching his arm. When Dink looked at him, Josh motioned with his head for Dink to walk away with him. He followed Josh away from the 3 men. I hate to say this, Josh whispered, but I think one of them stole the money. He tipped his chin toward Judd, Dean, and Scoop. Why would they do it? Dink asked. Judd and Dean really want to build the museum, and Scoop's going to work there. They wouldn't steal their own money, Josh. But who else has a key to the door or knows about that hiding place inside Tyrone? Josh insisted. Dink shook his head. He kicked a small stone. No one can make me believe Judd would do such a rotten thing, he said. Just then, Ruth Rose and Officer Fallon came hurrying across Center Park. Dink and Josh walked back to the Centaur. Officer Fallon introduced himself and pulled his notebook and pen from a shirt pocket. Ruth Rose told me what happened, he said. He looked at the 3 men. May I have your names, please? He wrote down each name. Scoop? He asked. Is that a nickname? Scoop grinned. Yeah, I was the editor of my college newspaper. I got the name because I was always first with the news scoop. My real name is Michael Raker. Officer Fallon wrote it down. Can you show me where the money was when you fellas last saw it? Dean pointed through the door at the empty compartment. It was in there, except when we were on the road. Then we kept it with us in the truck. I put the duffel inside that compartment yesterday afternoon, Judd said. That's the last time I saw it. Wouldn't it be safer to keep your money in a bank? Officer Fallon asked. We thought the money was safe inside the dinosaur, Judd said. No one but us knew about the hidden compartment, and I was planning on taking the money to my bank back in Montana. Was that compartment locked? The police chief asked, writing in his notebook. Judd shook his head. No, but we always keep this outer door locked. Officer Fallon examined the keyhole. He removed the rubber wedge and swung the door back and forth on its hinges. Who has keys to this door? I have one, Dean said. He tapped his key ring. Judd held up his keys. And I have the only other key, he said. Officer Fallon made another note on his pad. So Mr. Wheat put the money into that compartment yesterday afternoon, he said. Then this morning after the show, Mr. Whitefeather looked for the money and discovered that it was gone. Is that correct? Actually, no, Dean said. I did the show, but it was Judd who found out the money was missing. Could the money have been stolen last night? Officer Fallon asked. Where did you fellows sleep? Scoop and I slept at the hotel, Judd said. We left the money in the compartment. We always do. Dean sleeps outside. He likes to guard Tyrone. Officer Fallon looked confused. Who's Tyrone? He asked. That's what we call the dinosaur, Scoop explained. Officer Fallon glanced at Dean. You slept out here all night? He asked. Even during the rain? Dean smiled. No, when it started to rain, I took my sleeping bag into the truck. Officer Fallon made more notes on his pad, then turned to Judd. Could anyone have snuck into your room and taken your key while you slept? He asked. Judd shook his head. The door was locked. Officer Fallon looked at Dean. How about your key, Mr. Whitefeather? He asked. Where was it while you slept out here? Dean held up his key ring. Clipped to my belt inside my sleeping bag with me. Officer Fallon swung the door wide and looked at the computer. Who makes this thing work? He asked. I do, Dean said. And my computer. So as far as you knew, the duffel bag was still hidden under the floor this morning, Officer Fallon stated. That's right, said Dean. Officer Fallon peered inside Tyrone. And you would have been sitting right over the money at your computer, right, Mr. Whitefeather? Dean nodded. But I figured it was already stolen by then, he said. After the show, when Judd moved the table and pulled the rug back, the duffel bag was gone. Officer Fallon placed the wedge so that the door remained slightly open. He looked at the three men. Gentlemen, let's walk across the street to my office. I'd like you to think about everything that's happened since you pulled in here yesterday. I want you to write it all down, even the tiniest details, no matter how unimportant they seem. How long will that take? Scoop asked. We have a lot of other schools to go to. We're supposed to be in New Haven tomorrow. Then we'd best get busy, Officer Fallon said.